On April the 1st, 2014, two Dutch girls in their early 20s on a working holiday to Panama decided to take what should have been a 3-hour hike to a local beauty spot. It was the last anyone saw of them until, months later, fragments of bone were found washed up on a riverbank miles from where they'd last been seen. Along with the remains were their phones and a camera. The images and phone logs that were retrieved from them revealed an horrific story. It seemed the two girls could have been alive somewhere for at least 10 days after their disappearance, while police, Dutch detectives, and even their parents searched desperately for them, perhaps agonizingly close by. It's a story full of confusion, misunderstandings, allegations of official incompetence, and suspicions of murder. And it's a story that became a monster, spawning thousands of forums, blogs, videos, books, documentaries, with endless theories from internet sleuths convinced that they've cracked the case, which makes the actual truth pretty hard to uncover. And be warned, it's not a pleasant story at all. This video contains some images, events, and theories that you could find very distressing. But with new investigations into the case set to begin, let's see if we can separate fact from fiction in the strange case of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon.
Across the western town, I got the inanimate killed, hiding a dark secret.
Cinco muertos. Says 5 dead.
Kris, aged 21, and Lisanne, who was a year older, grew up in Amersfoort in the Dutch province of Utrecht. Kris had just graduated from the University of Utrecht after studying cultural social education. Friends speak of a sparky, creative girl, cheerful and outspoken. She'd only left home a few weeks before. Lisanne had graduated in applied psychology a year earlier from nearby Deventer. A little less outgoing, she was said to be highly intelligent with a drive to succeed. They'd worked together in a local cafe for years and were good friends. To celebrate the end of their studies, they decided to take the trip of a lifetime, 6 weeks in Panama. But it wasn't to be just a holiday. They wanted to find volunteer work and help local people. To save up for the trip, they'd moved into a student house together and worked extra shifts in the cafe, while also spending long hours with their parents, planning every aspect of the adventure through a specialist travel firm. Both sets of parents stress over and over again that the girls were like that, organised, careful. They would never do anything, even go for a night out, without planning ahead. And this plan was a great one. They would spend 2 weeks touring the country, then head for the mountain town of Boquete in the western coastal province of Chiriquí. There, they'd stay with a local family and take Spanish lessons at a nearby language school, which had, according to emails, arranged for them to volunteer at a local school named Aura. On March the 15th, 2014, the girls finally left for Panama, and at first, everything went well. Just as planned, Kris and Lisanne spent their first 2 weeks travelling. Their daily texts and calls home, their diary entries and the many photographs they took show a typical backpacker's trip, seeing the sights, having fun, and meeting plenty of new people. Both texted their parents every single day, but in private, there were signs the girls weren't always as cautious as their parents might have liked. Diary entries tell of a taxi driver they didn't trust who was pressuring them into a ride. Despite their doubt, they took a chance and hoped for a happy outcome. Luckily, they were fine. But as we'll see next, their luck was about to run out. On March the 29th, Kris and Lisanne arrived at Boquete, the place they'd expected to spend the rest of their trip. And this is where things start to get complicated. Claims, counterclaims, and wild stories start to swirl around. Local media reports on the case are often inaccurate, and being badly translated into English or Dutch, get even more mangled. So let's try and establish the known facts. The girls found their lodging in the house of Miriam Guerra, who often took in foreign students as guests. They enrolled in the Dutch-run language school as arranged. But something went wrong at Aura, the children's school they were supposed to be volunteering at. Either they were told they'd arrived a week early, or that they weren't wanted at all. Lisanne in particular seemed upset and worried, and it's understandable. Despite the meticulous months of planning back in the Netherlands, they were now pretty much stranded. But not to be beaten, they decided to try and find other volunteering opportunities, and in the meantime, to get to know their new neighbourhood. According to their host, they spoke of wanting to see local sites, a volcano and some hidden waterfalls mentioned in the guidebook. Being the sort of girls who liked to organise things, it seems that on Monday, March the 31st, they booked a local guide to take them on a tour that coming Wednesday. But this left them at a loose end for the next day, Tuesday, April the 1st. One of the most popular local trips around Boquete is the hike along the El Pianista Trail, climbing 2,000 feet through cloud forests and spectacular gorges to the peak of El Mirador Mountain, offering spectacular views out over the jungle beyond. Though only around 5 miles there and back, it can be challenging in poor weather, and there had been cases of people getting lost and having to be rescued. There had also been reports of robberies on the trail, and so visitors are always advised to book a guide to make the trip with them. But on that morning of Tuesday, the 1st of April, it seems Kris and Lisanne decided to ignore that advice. They began searching Google Maps for the route up to El Mirador. Kris sent her boyfriend a text message to say they were planning a hike. Sometime after 1 p.m, a taxi driver says he picked them up in Boquete, a fact seemingly confirmed by a worker at the language school. According to the driver, he dropped the girls at Il Pianista restaurant, the beginning of the trail, around 1:40 p.m. A number of local people claimed to have seen them then or later, but within hours, Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon vanished. That Kris and Lisanne had left to climb El Pianista seemed fairly clear from the start, but there is a lot of uncertainty and many different claims. Some witnesses say they made the climb and came back to town. Others that the girls were planning to go to the city instead of hiking. That they'd been seen at a cafe with 2 men and even gone swimming with them. That Lisanne in particular seemed breathless, perhaps struggling with the altitude. Miriam Guerra, whose house they were staying in, did agree that Lisanne seemed to have a cold. The family running the restaurant near the start of the trail said their dog followed Kris and Lisanne, as it often did with the walkers who passed by, but later it came back alone. As we'll see later, there was no evidence this happened. Even the timing of events is unclear, with some sources claiming the girls began their walk much earlier in the day. Miriam Guerra said in one interview that, realizing that the girls hadn't returned, she and her family went out looking for them that evening. But in another, she appears to say she didn't even know they were missing until the Wednesday morning, when a local guide named Feliciano Gonzalez came to see why the girls hadn't turned up for the trip that had been arranged. The guide's story also changed. At first, he said he'd met them on the Monday at the language school, given them his card and arranged a different trip to his own ranch that was also to include a German girl working at the school, but later he denied that, saying he'd never actually met them, that the booking had been made remotely. Yet, as this photograph shows, his brochure was certainly found on Kris's bed in the room the girls had been sharing. This sort of confusion probably messed up the investigation from the start, and over the years, endless theories have appeared online mixing truth and speculation even further, especially about what Gonzalez did or didn't do. But none of them get us any closer to the truth. Over the next days and weeks, wide-ranging searches by helicopters, local police and dog units, and later Dutch detectives, with some of the girls' own parents, found nothing. Eventually, the searches wound down, and the heartbroken parents flew home alone. Somehow, Kris and Lisanne's great adventure had ended in tragedy, but it seemed exactly what had happened would never be known. Then came news of a find that turned a missing persons into something much more frightening. Bucchetti is a small town, around 20,000 people, but it wouldn't have been too much of a culture shock for the two European girls. It had bars, cafes, friendly locals, and lots of foreign visitors, some from the girls' own country. There were shops, phone coverage, internet, not too different to tourist towns anywhere. But you don't need to travel far to reach a different world. Dense forest, dotted with fields and the villages of indigenous peoples who scrape a living from the jungle, a wilder, more dangerous place. It was from this world that on June the 11th, 10 whole weeks after Kris and Lisanne vanished, that a local woman named Irma Mirando reported something unusual. By a rice paddy on the banks of the river Culebra, close to the village of Alto Romero, she said she found a blue rucksack. It seemed to be slightly wet, a little battered, but in generally very good shape. Near this spot, human remains were also soon recovered. And be warned, some of those images are coming up. According to police, the rucksack seemed to have been dragged at some point. There was a little river sand inside, but its contents were fairly clean. A water bottle, the girls' sunglasses and bras, around $88 in cash, a few other small items. But most importantly, 2 phones and a Canon PowerShot digital camera as well. Over the next weeks and months, wider searches uncovered more human remains scattered along the riverbank upstream and downstream from the location of the backpack. A total of over 30 bone fragments, ribs, leg bones, part of a pelvis, plus a pair of shorts. Most gruesome of all, a laced-up walking boot, still containing a foot. DNA evidence was to prove that this was Lisanne's. DNA from some of the other bones was conclusively linked to Kris, though some of the bones came from neither of them. Like everything in this story, there are conflicting reports and allegations about the remains, even in the official reports. Though not all the information has been made public, they seemed to show no evidence of foul play. The toes on Lisanne's foot were broken, and with evidence of inflammation too, walking would have been difficult. A lot has been written about the difference between the remains discovered. Those of Lisanne were said to be pretty much as you'd expect after 10 weeks, but Kris's were, according to one report, bleached as if lime had been poured on them to speed up decomposition. But it was later revealed that the authorities had boiled some of Kris's remains to check for damage to the bones themselves. Events like this soon led to allegations of the case being mishandled from the media and the parents of both girls. With the physical remains revealing very little, it was the phones and especially the camera that provided the only real clues of what may have happened. But even this evidence is uncertain. Not all the photographs seem to have been released. There are numerous crops, enhanced and photoshopped images circulating online. There are disputed claims about the calls too. Kris's phone was apparently not set to local time, and the timestamp on the camera is wrong. It wasn't even set to the right year, so there's no definite proof the photographs were taken on the day the girls vanished. If nothing else though, they do prove that the girls did climb El Pianista Trail, and if it was on April the 1st with the phone records, it could give a rough timeline for the events that followed. Coming up, I'll be looking at the evidence that shows how a simple hike went terrifyingly, fatally wrong as we examine the last ever images of Kris and Lisanne. As we've seen, Kris and Lisanne loved to photograph their adventures, and there are plenty of images from their climb of El Pianista. They seem their usual happy selves, posing for snaps and selfies. They're lightly dressed, and though they're carrying water, there's no evidence they have food or any emergency equipment. Glimpsed in some of the images, both the bras they're wearing and Kris's shorts seem to match the items recovered later with the rucksack. There's no evidence that they were red-faced, tired and breathless, as some had claimed, and they seem to reach the summit of the climb with ease. Too easily, say some theorists. It proves, they claim, that the girls must have had a local guide to travel so fast. But other sources say they were actually going at a fairly average pace, and there's no evidence in the images that anyone else is with them, or that the dog said to have set off with them was ever there. What these first photographs definitely show, though, is that the girls didn't stick to the route. Instead of retracing their steps back to the restaurant from the summit of El Mirador, they carried on, deeper into much wilder, more rugged terrain. As this video shows, though still a trail, it's far from the easy walking the girls had experienced earlier. This is the very last photo known to have been taken on that day, the last, probably, of either girl alive. Kris seems perhaps a little less happy, though not obviously unwell or upset. Does she know they're lost? The location has been identified. They're still not too far from the summit of El Mirador and the route back to Buketi, but something was about to go very wrong. According to the camera roll, this final image was taken 2 hours and 48 minutes after the first of the shots they took that day. If the taxi driver who dropped the girls off was accurate, that might put the time it was taken somewhere around 4:30. Examination of the phones show that around 4:40 p.m, Kris's phone was used to make an emergency call. Around 10 minutes later, Lisanne's phone was also used. Both of these calls were to 112, the Dutch emergency number, but there was no cell service in the area, so none of these calls ever connected. Incredibly, both phones are then used to try and make contact for days afterwards, and it seems systematic. After an early flurry of attempts to reach 112 and also 911, the phones are turned on and off a couple of times a day to check for signal, usually with no attempt to actually make a call. Could this be evidence of a plan, someone trying to conserve battery life? Certainly, Lisanne's Galaxy does seem to run out of battery on the 4th, but Kris's iPhone follows the same on-off pattern till April the 6th, nearly a week after the girls vanished, and its battery was still not exhausted when the last activity took place. There seems to be sense, logic in the pattern, a plan of sorts. But if they were alive and capable of such rational action for at least a week, why were they not found? Many theories suggest they were being held captive, but surely their phones would have been removed. And why did the calls stop on the 6th? Without any other evidence, it would be easy to guess that was the day the girls finally died. But there was to be at least one more attempt to use the phone on the 11th of April, 10 days after they set out. But before that is perhaps the strangest, most chilling part of the whole story. Stay with us as we look at the extraordinary final photographs found on the camera. After the last image of Kris taken on the day they vanished, the camera seems to not have been used again, until suddenly there is a burst of nearly 100 more photographs, all seemingly taken in complete darkness. As far as experts could tell, they're all taken between roughly 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. on the morning of April the 8th. This time there are no smiling selfies. The pictures are random and chaotic. The vegetation indicates they're still in the wilder area beyond El Mirador, and it seems to be raining. There are hints of what could be a cliff edge, and maybe one of the rough monkey bridges that crisscross rivers in the area. What appear to be scraps of paper, perhaps a mirror of some sort, and some odd objects not immediately identifiable. Many shots seem to be taken in the same place, often in quick succession. Most unsettling of all, 3 images that show what appears to be Kris's hair and perhaps a glimpse of her face. It's sometimes claimed that there is blood visible in the hair. I certainly don't see that though. But why, a week after the girl's disappearance, is there this wild burst of activity? And what is happening? Were they trying to photograph something or just make use of the flash? Maybe to attract attention or scare something off. There are predators in the area, though attacks on people are rare. Maybe they'd become separated, and one girl was using the flash to search for the other. Were they being forced to move for some reason? The area is subject to extreme weather and flash flooding. Search attempts were hampered by the weather around this time, and the photographs do show what seems to be rain. There are also unconfirmed reports that one of their phones was used to try and check a weather app, but these photos remain baffling and also deeply unsettling. Many conspiracies center around these images, and also the fact that there is one photograph that seems to have been deleted from the camera. It's the one directly after the last shot of Kris and before the final crazy nighttime sequence. Was the missing photograph somehow significant too? An incriminating picture of someone who shouldn't have been with the girls? Maybe, but it seems more likely to be a mistake, accidentally deleted by the police themselves whilst examining the camera. But what happened in the 3 days between the final photographs and the last attempt to use the phone on April the 11th? Were the girls delirious, no longer thinking clearly enough to try and make contact? If so, how come they managed to neatly pack the phone and camera back into their rucksack before it was found 10 weeks later and many miles from where they were last seen? Could it have been someone else using the phone? It's this part of the story that has often sent the media and online sleuths into overdrive. And as we'll see next, many of the theories sound like the plot of a straight-to-cable slasher movie. With the lack of much real evidence, thousands of theories have erupted across the web. The girls were kidnapped before making a desperate late-night escape that ultimately failed. They were hunted through the jungle for sport by local thugs. They ran into a drugs gang and had to be silenced. Or Feliciano, the guide from Buchetti, accompanied them up the mountain before raping and murdering them. Perhaps they were killed and dismembered by a gang who then sold their organs. In most of these theories, the perpetrators then spend the next 11 days attempting to make it look like it was all an accident, faking the calls and taking the random photos. There are even theories that Kris and Lisanne were captured by a sex trafficking gang and may still be alive. DNA evidence definitely rules that out, but some of the others certainly aren't impossible. There have been a number of unexplained disappearances and murders in the area, before and after this case. Some of the girls' remains were found on land belonging to Feliciano's family. He himself discovered Lisanne's boot. Was it because he knew where to look? There's no solid evidence for any of these ideas. Most are based on incomplete or incorrect information, some on pure speculation. The official explanation from both the Panamanian and Dutch investigators, the only people who actually had all the facts, was that it was an accident. And personally, I tend to agree. More than any other theory, it fits the available evidence and needs no leaps of faith. Perhaps Lisanne slips and breaks the bones in her foot that were later spotted by the coroner. Maybe Kris is unwilling to leave her friend, or perhaps tired, unsure of their exact location, and aware that night is falling, doesn't want to risk the trip back alone. Not being able to call for help and not knowing if a search is underway, they keep moving, day by day, as best they can in search of a signal, which they never find. And then, hopelessly lost, sometime in the early hours of April the 8th, disoriented, hungry, cold and wet in the increasingly bad weather, trying to move over treacherous rocks in pitch darkness by the light of a flashbulb, they slip and fall into the rock-strewn river that eventually deposits some of their bones along miles of riverbank, far downstream. The final call on April the 11th? Well, perhaps Memorando's description of finding the backpack wasn't the full story. Perhaps it was found much earlier, maybe closer to where the girls went missing, by someone unaware of its importance at the time, or scared of being accused of something. And wouldn't you check the phone? But now I'm speculating too. Let us know in the comments what you think happened. And be sure to check out a blog called Coup de Casse by Scarlett R. It's probably the most detailed source anywhere about Kris and Lisanne's story, and it's been a massive help in creating this video. Ultimately, beyond all the mystery and speculation, we must remember that this is a story about two young, optimistic girls, barely out of their teens, who wanted to make the world a better place, but who died terrified, lost and alone in a jungle thousands of miles from home. For their sakes and their families, I really hope the new investigations find truth, not just more theories. Thanks for watching.